Esther will remind us when we can continue, when the live stream is
I can confirm we're live now.
Okay, lovely. So declarations of interest and party whip. And this is, does any council have a disclosable pecuniary interest or affected interest to declare? Please also declare the nature of the interest. This also includes existence and nature of any party whip in respect of matters considered in the meeting. Anyone? Okay. I personally have to declare an affected interest as my employer undertakes work for Thames Water from time to time, and I'm occasionally allocated to such projects. Okay. Any other thing on item number 2? Then we move to my introduction, and before we move on to our witness session, the introduction is about this Environment and Communities panel, which is part of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission of Brighton Forest Council. Little bit of background. In August 16th this year, we discussed the recommendation agreed at Council on the 12th of July 2023 that Overview and Scrutiny should work with other local authorities across the Thames Valley to challenge Thames Water discharging sewage into our local waterways and thus minimize environmental damage and impact to our residents. It was agreed to undertake a scrutiny review with a revised scope compared to the full text of the Council motion at the time. And the panel has agreed a scope for the multi-stage review to answer primarily the following questions. Which options are available to Brighton Forest Council to effect changes resulting in reduced frequency and impact of Thames Water operation and sewage discharges? And what collaboration opportunities with other affected local authorities exist? The review has been broken down into multiple stages due to the complexity of the matter. This first stage will identify the interfaces between Brighton Forest Council, the parish councils and residents with Thames Water and other agencies, reach out and identify local and regional stakeholders to start and engage with a cross-borough forum for coordination with Thames Water, and establish an overview over the regulatory framework in which Brighton Forest Council and other stakeholders operate regarding Thames Water. I mean, looking into news, it has become relatively obvious that Thames Water as an organization is currently relatively heavily scrutinized, both by Parliament and by the general public, as represented by the press. And personally, I think that the current situation of utility providers and the ownership structure, the associated regulatory framework, is considered by all parties represented in Westminster and also represented in this panel. And changes of this framework might emerge in the future. This panel meeting is, however, not intended to deal with the big picture, but with the concerns of our local residents. We have the aim to establish a durable framework for cooperation between all stakeholders to develop, maintain, and communicate our pathway to a more sustainable future, characterized by high quality of our environment, in particular our rivers. And just to be blunt, our residents have the expectation that lakes can be used for outdoor activities without risking sick dogs or personal E. coli infection. And they expect that grease and foam in the rivers are a thing of the past. But I believe that all attendees of this panel can sign up to this aspiration and turn it into a reality. So with this, we will now move to the witness session. We have shared the agenda with you, given the we have had some additional thoughts and moved things around a little bit and to make it more focused. We will start with an introduction by all stakeholders, including setting the scene, sharing with us your key issues, and also what your intended takeaway points from this meeting are. We will then move on to the presentation with Thames Water have kindly shared with us already, and look into that. We will then follow with the question list or the questionnaire, which we as panel have prepared, and hope to make this into a panel discussion between all the stakeholders represented in this meeting. Then we'll move to any final thoughts and a sum up, and then hopefully it's 8 o'clock and we finish on time. All right, so with that, I suggest we start with Thames Water. And Richard, would you mind picking the ball up here?
Thank you very much, Christoph, and good evening, everybody. I'm Richard Aylard. I'm the Sustainability Director at Thames Water. I should make it clear I'm not an engineer, an accountant, or an economist. I'm a freshwater biologist and an environmentalist, and I've worked for Thames Water for 21 years. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Nikki Hines. Nikki, you'd like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Nikki Hines. I do the stakeholder engagement between MPs and councillors for South Thames Valley. I'm part of Richard's team.
Okay, Richard, Nikki, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Is there any? Well, my first quiz is basically, what's your takeaway points? Do you have anything specific you want to achieve with the meeting, or in presentation and listening mode?
No, I'm keen to go through the presentation because I think there are some points in there that we can draw out which will inform the discussion and help the council. I'm not in any way trying to be defensive or to suggest that the situation in many ways is not currently unacceptable. The question is, what do we do about it, in what order, and how long will it take? But first of all, in the presentation, I want to cover why is this happening? Because I think it's important that we should get that clear first before we start to work out what to do about it. So then if you'd like me to give my presentation now or in a minute, that's up to you.
In a minute. We start with the other witnesses. Thank you very much for that. So I suggest, Dave, you're up next. Good evening.
Good evening. Dave Willis. I'm an environment manager with the Environment Agency Thames area. So as and when you want, Chair, I propose to do a verbal summary setting out the role of the Environment Agency in protecting and improving the water environment in the Bracknell Forest area, and then, as requested, also give an overview of our role in regulating Thames Water. So I'll give a brief verbal summary, and then I'll be happy to take questions.
All right. So Dave, what's your intended takeaway points?
I'm keen that you understand the agency's role and our position on the current water environment in your area, and also be clear that you know where we are and our position on the regulation of Thames Water. So that's the remit I was given with the invite.
Okay, then we haven't seen the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue at them so far. If it's all right with both of you, then I would suggest we start with the Thames Water presentation, followed by your presentation, Dave, and we then move on to the questions which we as a panel have to our witnesses here. Okay, if everybody's agreed with that, then again, handing over to Thames Water. So,
to see if I can share my screen.
That's good.
Yeah, have you got it? Is it?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So let me. First of all, this is the area. You'll recognise it very well. And you can see we've marked the main, well, all the sewage works, in fact, with each one has an orange dot. So in alphabetical order, you've got Ascot Sewage Works, which treats the waste of just over 30,000 people. You've got Billingbear Sewage Works at the other end of the scale, which treats the waste of just 40. It's not much more than a septic tank. We have Bracknell Sewage Treatment Works, much the biggest, 81,000 people's waste treated there. East Hampton Park, about 7,000. And Sandhurst, like Ascot, just over 30,000. That's where the treatment actually takes place. But I want to talk a little bit about the principle of how a sewage works operates. And to do that, I'm going to use a relatively small sewage works, because the bigger the works, the more complicated the process, the more things are covered up, the more difficult it is to explain exactly what's going on in terms of the process. So I usually use this works. This is actually Kintbury Sewage Works. It's in West Berkshire, discharges to the Kennet and Avon Canal, and it treats the waste of about 3,500 people in 2 villages. And each of those villages has a pumping station, and it pumps the sewage from all the homes in the village up to the sewage treatment works. And it arrives at the inlet works. Now, the inlet works is a really important part of the sewage works, because that's where we screen out all the things that our lovely customers send us but shouldn't. All we're supposed to be able to treat is pee, poo, and paper, and that's all we'd like to get through the sewers. But we get wet wipes, we get nappies, we get underwear, we get toothbrushes, we get all sorts of stuff, pairs of tights, things that shouldn't be arriving at the works. And if they get into the works, they very, very rapidly clog it up and take up much needed capacity. And one of the most important things to remember about a sewage works is it's 24/7 infrastructure. You can shut the M4, you can shut Paddington Station, you can shut Heathrow, you can't shut a sewage works. So everything you do is a live environment. So we want to keep all of that out. So we screen it out, and it goes off in skips, and it has to go to landfill because it's got mixed products in it. We also screen out grit, because grit is particularly bad, obviously, for pumps and moving machinery. Everything else goes to the primary settlement tanks. And as the name suggests, what happens there is we slow everything down. And the solid material, which, by the way, is now pretty well churned up, having been through the sewers and through pumping stations, that just settles out to the bottom over time. And we call that sludge. And it's mechanically scraped off and pumped away to a storage tank. And I'll come back to sludge in a minute. Once we've done that, then the liquid remaining on top is now a sort of a weakish grey tea colour. And all it's had so far is it's had mechanical treatment. It's been screened and it's been settled. The biology happens next in these what are called filter beds. Now, the process here is you are using good bacteria, activated sludge bacteria, to treat the sewage. And to do that, they need lots of oxygen and a reasonable residence time. And you can do this in lots of ways. Where you've got space like this out in the country, use these filter beds. They're full of a clinker, has a very high surface area, and it creates a biofilm on them. And as the sewage goes down through there, so it gets treated, the ammonia is removed, and we get much basically clean effluent coming out of that process. But you can imagine you couldn't do something of that scale for large towns, cities. So in those places, we have aeration lanes where we pump air through the sewage. It's more energy intensive, but it does the same thing. The bugs do their work, and we get clean effluent at the end of the process. And that goes into what we call the final settlement tank, or a humus tank. And this is where we just slow it all down again, and very, very fine particles, sort of talcum powder fine, dust-like, settle out, and they also go off to be collected up as sludge. And by this stage, the sewage has taken about 8 to 9 hours to get through the process, and what goes into the river, or in this case, the canal there, number 4, is pretty clean. We've taken out a large proportion of the E. coli, but that's a byproduct of the process. It's not part of the permit, and the process isn't designed to take out E. coli. It's just that it does take out about 99%, but there is still, of course, some in treated effluent. We might come back to that. And then the sludge goes to a sludge holding tank, and once a week, once every 10 days, a tanker arrives. We take that sludge off to one of our treatment centres, and we generate energy from it, and the solid material goes out to farmland as a soil conditioner. And that process pretty much runs itself until it starts raining. Now, why does rain cause a problem? Basically, because it isn't possible to have sewers hermetically sealed. So you're always going to get some degree of rainwater mixing with the sewage, and the flow arriving at the works increases. How much it increases depends on lots of things: how wet the ground is, how high the groundwater is, how long it's been raining for. But there is a limit. Because you need the residence time in the works for the treatment to work, you can't push the sewage through too fast. If you do, it'd be like taking the Sunday joint out of the oven after half an hour. It's not cooked, and we'd be putting untreated sewage in the river. So there is a limit to the amount of sewage that the works can treat at any one time. And that is set in the site's permit. In this case, it's around 70 litres a second. So if we start to get more than 70 litres per second, we've got to do something with it. We can't turn the pumps off in the village, so we have to put it somewhere. So it overflows into first one storm tank and then a second storm tank. And we hold it there until such time as the incoming flow subsides. And then pumps kick in and it's pumped from the storm tanks back to the inlet works. So you've had it's a sort of parking area for sewage. And that again works fine. The problem comes when the works is full, the storm tanks are full, and you've still got more sewage coming in from the pumping stations than you can cope with. And at that point, you haven't got very much that you can do. So that's why the site has a permit that says if it's treating more than it's required, or at or more than the 70 litres a second, and the storm tanks are full, then it can discharge to the river at point 4. Now that sewage is not technically untreated. It's been screened when it arrived at the works, and it's been settled in the tanks, but it hasn't had biological treatment. And of course, it's not good, particularly not good for a canal. So that's how the storm tanks work. But I want to look at why flows go up after rain. It certainly isn't because people are taking more showers or using more baths. So the first thing is infiltration. As I said, a sewer network can't be completely hermetically sealed, but you can also have cracks in between the pipes. And if you do, when the groundwater levels outside the sewers are high, it will come in. Unlike a water pipe, which is pressurized and leaks outwards, the sewer is generally not pressurized and you get infiltration. The problem comes in trying to find the infiltration. You've probably got from Bracknell something like 300 miles of sewers coming in, and there will only be infiltration in a few places. And the other thing is you can only find it when it's happening. You can put as many cameras down as you like in dry weather, nothing to see. And when it's really wet, as it is now, and the sewers are full, again, the camera can't see anything. So you've got quite a narrow window of opportunity to trace this down with cameras, get the location sorted, and work out where you need to do some relining. So that's one problem. The other one is on the right. Outside almost all houses in our area, except central London, there are 2 sewer networks. There's a foul water sewer, which is marked in orange there, and that takes what comes out of the house: baths, toilets, showers, washing machines, dishwashers. All of that comes into a foul water sewer. And it's actually quite small. It's about the diameter of a grapefruit. And then you've got the surface water sewer, which is much bigger. And that takes the runoff from the roof, the drives, the roads, and that goes, because it's clean water, that goes straight to a water course. The problem comes if you get misconnections. If you've got the surface water sewer, or things that should be in the surface water sewer going to the foul water sewer, they very quickly buy up the space, the capacity in the foul water sewer. And that can lead to either an overflowing sewer or an overloaded sewage treatment works. So we have to try and find these misconnections. They tend to be on older houses, and they tend to be where we've had either dodgy plumbers or DIY builders just connecting up to what looks like the most convenient pipe, but not easy to find. When we find them, we can persuade people to sort them out, and we can help them to do that. The misconnections from the surface to foul and foul to surface are quite a big issue. They should be properly separate systems. We might come back to that later. And then we have inundation. On the left there, you can see a manhole cover, and you can see it's got some slots in it. Now that's obviously where you put your lever in to get it lifted up, but it's also to allow the sewer to breathe. If sewers don't breathe, the sewage won't flow properly, and it will also not have enough air, so it'll go black and septic, and you'll start to get very bad odor. So sewers are designed to breathe. But of course, if water is running down the street after heavy rainfall, it's going down through the edge of the manhole covers, and it's adding to your flow in your foul sewer. On the right, you've got physical damage. This is actually under Amersham Town Centre. The council had put in charging points for electric vehicles, and the contractors didn't know where the sewer was, and that orange pipe has gone straight through our sewer. As it happened, we'll be doing some survey work, and we found it, but you can see the amount of water that's gushing in there, coming into what should be a foul sewer, taking only foul flow. And then we have quite a lot of this. This is a sewer where somebody has just knocked a hole in the side on the right there. This was actually a pub car park. It was obviously flooding. They got a contractor in, sort out the flooding. He dug down, found the pipe, knocked a hole in the side of it. The flooding was sorted, and until our team found this, we were taking the contents of the pub car park into our sewers. So quite a lot going on there that needs to be looked at. And quite a lot of work required given the length of the sewers to try and find where all this is happening. So having talked about that, I want to talk too about other issues. So this is Environment Agency's list of the reasons for not achieving good ecological status in the Thames River Basin. So it's an aggregate across the whole of the Thames and its catchments. It'll vary bit but from tributary to tributary, but you can see on the right there, the blue segment, about a third of the problem is us, and we're the biggest single problem, no question about it. But you've also got agriculture and rural land management, quite a big section, and then you've got urban and transport. Urban runoff, particularly because it carries with it where tires have worn down, brake linings, everything like that all ends up in a surface water sewer and ends up in the river. And then there are a number of other potential factors, including in industry, etc. So we're part of the problem. We're a big part of the problem. We're the single biggest bit of the problem, but we do need to work collaboratively with other sectors to sort out the problems and get all our rivers up to good ecological status as quickly as possible. Now, it's very important when things go wrong that people tell us. So in the past, we've asked people to call our customer centre when they see something that might look like a pollution, but then they end up in a queue behind people who want to talk about their water bills or report a leak. So we've now got report a problem online. You quickly tell us what you found, where you found it, and we'll get a team out there within 2 hours, day and night, 24/7, 365 days of the year, to look at what's going on and take action. And the team that arrive, it's not just one man on a motorbike, it's 2 guys in a van with lots of kit. And once they get there, they can very quickly take action to mitigate the pollution, whether we've caused it or not. So this could be a garage forecourt that's running petrol or oil into a watercourse. It could be a farm spilling, or it could be a Thames water asset. But whatever it is, we'll get a team there, and we will. They're usually there within an hour. If it's 2 hours, it's because the traffic's bad. And then we get our contractors and response contractors to take water quality samples, and of course it's reported to the Environment Agency. So we're trying to get this report a problem online tool widely known about, and happily give you links to it afterwards if you were able to help us publicize it. We also think it's right that people should know when we've had one of those storm discharges that I talked about. So we've published an interactive map, which I expect some of you will have seen. We were the first company to do this. We did it on a voluntary basis. The government's now said that all companies have to do it. So we've been out on our own with it for a year, and it's been an interesting learning experience. But what we found is that customers find it helpful. They want to know what's going on. They want to see what's going on. And with this, a red symbol shows you that the sewer is actually discharging now. Orange, it's discharged within the last 48 hours, and green is hasn't discharged for longer than that. And we're constantly looking at ways of improving and updating the map. So the latest innovation is it will now, when you click on something, it'll now tell you what our plans are for that site. So you can see what we're doing about a problem, as well as telling you that one of these discharges is happening. And in reporting this, we're not in any way trying to suggest this is acceptable. It's not. Putting untreated sewage into rivers is unacceptable. The question is, well, why and how is it happening? What can we do about it? How can we stop it? And that's a job for not just for us, but for our regulators and the government and communities as well. So how are the sewage works in your area doing on discharges? On the left there, you've got number of overflows, and on the right, you've got duration of overflows. And you can see that we've got 4 years there, 2020, 21, 22. And the 2023 numbers, of course, are up to probably about a week ago, and they are, of course, as yet unverified, so need to be all got to be worked through and checked, but they probably won't be far out. And you can see that Bracknell is way out ahead of the others, and that's why we've got a really big scheme being developed for Bracknell. The others are up and down a bit, and that depends as much on as anything on the weather. So you can see Bracknell is the best example. 2020, very wet year, huge number of overflows. 2021, a bit drier. 2022, more or less a drought year. 2023, getting back to being a more normal year. So that information is all available, and it's reported to the Environment Agency at the end of every year. Now, in terms of what we're doing at the various sewage works, Ascot is being upgraded at the moment. That's going to cost a bit over 11 million. Big increase in treatment capacity. It currently treats 157 litres a second. That'll go up to 220. And that will make a big difference to the number of untreated discharges. They should go down, although we'll come back to that a bit in a minute. And that scheme is finished in 2024. And then we're going to look and see, take stock and see how that's done. Potentially there'll be a bit more work required in 2026. Bracknell is the big scheme that's still being designed. We'll get that complete in 2026. East Hampstead Park, we know we're going to need to do some work there, and that will be in the next regulatory period, so after 2025. And Sandhurst, we also need to upgrade to treat volumes of incoming sewage, and that will be complete in 2025. So we can give you more details on any of those. We can arrange visits, happy to talk about it, but those are just sort of snapshots of where we are. So one or two other issues I wanted to just touch on. The first thing is we have something called the Surface Water Outfall Programme. So I talked about how we have a problem when surface water gets into the foul sewer, but we also have a problem if anything from the foul sewer gets into the surface water sewer, because of course that is going straight to a river or a stream, and it's taking everything with it. And we do have a big problem in some areas with, again, I'm afraid, plumbers, DIY people connecting up probably unknowingly to the wrong pipe. So we do end up with potentially sewage going into a watercourse along with the surface water. So we have a team of brave men and women armed with chicken wire and dye and all sorts of other methods whereby they go along and they put chicken wire across the end of the outfall, see what they catch, and then they have to trace it back up through the network with dye to find the householder who's caused the problem. And then we have to engage with the householder to get them to rectify the problem. And if they're not prepared to, which to be fair, most of them do, but if they won't help or we can't find them, then local authorities can help us with enforcement. We're also doing a lot of work to try and persuade people to put the things that shouldn't be in the sewers in the bin, because if they put them in the sewer, they can block the sewer, causing a fatberg, which then causes sewage to overflow, causing a pollution incident. That's really bad. And the least bad thing is they can arrive at the sewage works and have to be scraped off the screens. So if we can persuade people not to put oils, greases, turkey fat, wet wipes down the sewer, that will make things a great deal easier. So rather than trying to just bombard all our 16 million customers, we work out which are the blockage hotspots, often near fast food establishments, and then we work with those food establishments to help them on best kitchen practices, which of course means you have to work in lots of languages, and it's also a continuous task because the people who work in those places generally only stay there for a year or two, so you're constantly having to educate new staff, and we've accepted that, and we just have a constant round of knocking on doors and explaining to people how fat traps should work and why there are problems. Sorry. And finally, just wanted to talk about the bigger picture, the longer term. We've always had, going back to privatisation, water resource management plans, which answer the questions, how much water do we expect to need over the next 25 years? Where's it going to come from? We haven't had a strategic statutory plan until now. So all water companies have done their first drainage and wastewater management plans. These ones aren't statutory, but the next one will be. So it's a learning experience. We've worked with councils, including Bracknell Forest, looking ahead. What do we need to do? When do we need to do it? And accepting that drainage in particular is it's a collaborative exercise. You can't have one organisation doing it, particularly when you're looking at things like flooding. We all need to be involved: the water companies, Environment Agency, councils, community groups. So again, we can give you links to the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan. And that's all I wanted to say, but I'm very happy to take questions on that. I'm sorry it was a fairly rushed canter through, and some of you may have known a lot of that anyway, but I thought it was important to just get it all on the table as background for the discussion.
No, Richard, thank you very much for that presentation. Really useful. We have some background sound here. One second, please, while we sort it out. Okay, jolly good. That's sorted. Now, Richard, thanks a lot for that presentation. Really useful, very interesting. I suggest we now, before we move to the questions, I think the questions will come from the discussion and the main questioners, which we have anyway. We'll move on to Dave and give him the platform to talk about your expectations and your role here in this whole environment. So, Dave, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to cover two subject areas in my verbal summary. Firstly, I'll give an overview about the Environment Agency's role in protecting and improving the water environment in the Bracknell Forest area. And then secondly, I'll go on to give a summary overview of our role in regulating Thames water. So firstly, the Environment Agency's role in protecting and improving the quality of the water environment in the Bracknell Forest area is shaped by some key overarching plans, including the government's Integrated Plan for Clean and Plentiful Water, which was published earlier this year, and also the Thames River Basin Management Plan. These set out the current status of the water environment. They set objectives and priority actions going forward. The ecological health of our rivers is clearly not where it needs to be, and there is much work to be done to achieve the government's 25-year plan target of at least 75% of our water bodies achieving good ecological status. The pressures on our water environment are diverse and complex. A key message in the various national and regional plans is that we all need to take integrated action, and that catchment-based partnerships will be key, with all relevant organisations and sectors stepping up to the challenge. We look at the current status of rivers in the Bracknell Forest area. None of the 6 river water bodies currently meet good ecological status. The key pressures that are set out in the River Basin Management Plan for the Bracknell Forest area are water pollution, both continuous and intermittent wastewater impacts, physical habitat modification, and urbanisation. The Environment Agency has an important and diverse role in protecting and improving the quality of the water environment. Some of our key activities include responding to serious environmental incidents, undertaking environmental monitoring programmes, completing strategic planning, including for both water quality and water resources, determining relevant environmental permits and undertaking associated compliance and enforcement action, undertaking physical habitat restoration, and working in partnership, particularly with the catchment hosts. Some examples of EA actions in relation to those key pressures. In terms of water quality, our activities around responding to serious environmental incidents are important. Our regulation of Thames water, including planning, permitting and compliance activities, are key. And as Richard indicated earlier, there's also diffuse pollution implications, including from agriculture, and we complete and undertake regulatory farm inspections as part of our role. Some examples of our actions in relation to the water resources pressures include, again, our response to serious incidents, for instance, our response to last year's drought, and again, regulation of Thames Water's abstraction business, including, again, permitting and compliance. And then the third one, examples of our activities in relation to the pressures on physical habitats. We have a strong legacy of collaborative projects with partners to restore river habitats. That includes a wide range of river and wetland habitat restoration projects. And we work very closely with catchment partnerships, which in your case are Thames 21 for the Cut catchment and the South East Rivers Trust for the River Blackwater catchment. I'll now move on to give a brief overview of the Environment Agency's role in regulating Thames Water. So our regulation of water and sewage companies is focused on ensuring that the companies deliver their environmental responsibilities. And our role covers three primary areas. The first one is the assessment and reporting of water companies' environmental performance. The second one is providing guidance on an assessment of plans to protect and improve the environment. And the third area is the determination of environmental permits and associated compliance assessment and where needed, enforcement. I'll just pick up these briefly in turn. In relation to the assessment and reporting of companies' environmental performance, the Environment Agency undertakes annual assessments which are published each summer. The assessments cover several key aspects of water company environmental performance, and the assessment results in a 1-star to 4-star performance rating, with 1 star being poor and 4-star being industry leading. Thames Water received a rating of 2 stars in our 2022 assessment, showing that the company requires significant improvements to its environmental performance. Performance on some aspects has declined since 2021, with particular concerns regarding the total number of pollution incidents, the high number of serious pollution incidents, and the delay to some environmental improvement schemes. In relation to guidance and assessment of plans, the EA's role includes the provision of advice to government on a range of water companies' plans, and we also lead on the Water Industry National Environment Programme, which is a key part of the 5-yearly water company price review led by Ofwat. That programme sets out a 5-year investment programme, which of schemes required to deliver all current environmental obligations. As Richard has pointed out, water company plans also include drainage and wastewater management plans, and indeed also water resources management plans. And these are vital to set out the company's future plans to improve the environment over the next 25 years. Thames Water have recently submitted their business plan for the period 2025 to 2030 to Ofwat, including the Water Industry National Environment Programme, which sets out the company's plans to improve the environment. These plans are critical to deliver key environmental improvements by 2030. The plans also currently include implementation of the government's Storm Overflows Discharge Reduction Plan. The Environment Agency is currently reviewing Thames Water's recently submitted plan to assess if all relevant environmental obligations are included, and we'll advise government and Ofwat on the final plans, which are due to be determined in December 2024. And then the third area, our role includes determining appropriate environmental permits under the environmental permitting regulations with conditions that control the environmental impact. It also includes appropriate compliance assessment and enforcement actions relating to those permits. In relation to Thames Water, we undertake a wide range of compliance assessment activities relating to the permits that we've issued to the company. These include data return assessments, site inspections and audits. We've undertaken a range of enforcement action against Thames Water. For example, since 2015, we've had successful prosecutions at 17 Thames Water sites, with fines totaling in excess of £37 million. We also currently have a significant number of live investigations underway at a national and local level. This includes our largest ever criminal investigation into potential breaches of environmental permit conditions at over 2,000 sewage treatment works by all water and sewage companies. Our initial assessment indicates there may have been widespread and serious non-compliance of environmental permit conditions, and we are currently undertaking further investigations at specific sites. We also have ongoing investigations into the nature and extent of storm overflow discharges via the assessment of the water company event duration monitoring data, some of which Richard showed you some of those results. All storm overflows are required to have event duration monitoring in place by the end of this month. Going forwards, the EA is creating a larger and more specialised workforce to focus even further on water company regulations, with plans to increase our compliance assessment activities. So in summing up, the ecological quality of the rivers in the Bracknell Forest area is not where we all want them to be. The issues facing the catchments are varied and complex, with no simple or quick solutions. Considerable investigation, planning and investment is required to resolve them. Tackling the issues in an integrated way is vital, with all organisations and partners stepping up to the challenge. The Environment Agency will continue to work actively with catchment partnerships to support this. The EA will also continue to hold water companies to account to drive improved environmental performance, including increased investment in their operations and assets. We plan to increase our compliance activities and will continue to take appropriate enforcement action in line with our enforcement and prosecutions policy. And finally, EA staff are highly committed and care passionately about protecting and improving the environment. We will need to continue to prioritise our actions, and we'll continue to make the case for increased funding to support our own activities and the wider actions to protect and improve the water environment. That's my summary, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dave. Much appreciated. We had also Charlotte Dell from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue joining us. She was called out to a fire. There you go, and had to do her job and couldn't join us in the meeting early on. Charlotte, thanks you very much for making the effort to join us nonetheless. I'd invite you to take the floor and give us your view, and please raise any concerns which you have or observations. And if you have any takeaway points which you want to achieve here, please state them as well. Thank you, Charlotte.
Good evening. Sorry that I'm late and I've missed everything that's been said. I've been briefed by my boss, who I'm stepping in for this evening, to talk about a few sort of issues that we suffer with contaminated water in our sort of frontline role. So what I've got here is, we used to do training in open water sources, in rivers, things like the county lock. We used to use that as training for water rescue. Unfortunately, we shy away from doing any of those trainings in open water sources at the moment because of the risk of contamination. We've had staff come down poorly due to ingesting it whilst they're doing those activities, which sometimes can't be helped. So we actually now go and rent out clean water sources, for instance, like the Lee Valley Training Centre, or we actually send people all the way up to Cardiff in order to be able to train crews properly for water rescue. Apart from training for the service for that, and every station is trained up into water rescue, so that affects every station in Berkshire. We also then have to think about equipment, cleanliness, hygiene in terms of equipment. So if we do have incidents that involve open water sources, we make sure that every single piece of equipment then has to be decontaminated, cleaned, which will also keep that appliance off the run until that's been achieved, which will obviously sort of clog up our availability for other fire calls, car crashes, anything that we get called to, we actually stay off the run until the equipment is clean and ready to be redeployed. So that's the main thing in terms of decontaminating our equipment and making sure that our staff don't get poorly. So yeah, we don't actually use a lot of the open water around us, which we'd go to on an incident, for training purposes for safety.
Okay. No, thank you, Charlotte. So your interface is basically the interface with open water courses in our area, which then creates the health hazards or hazards, hazards, which you have stated. Okay, cool, lovely.
Thank you.
As you all know, we have prepared a little question list, a relatively long question list. We have 42 minutes left. I'm not quite sure we can go through all the questions which we have and do them all merit. We will, however, share the questions with all you participants after this meeting and hope that the stuff which you couldn't address today can be briefly replied to in writing, if possible at all. Okay, we have tried to make it a bit more interesting, so it's not just me speaking. We have obviously other councillors on the call. I would like to introduce you to Adrian Heffergy from the Green Party, who will ask the first question.
Okay, so thank you. I guess this first question is for Richard. It's slightly tweaked from the original question we've sent you, since you've, I guess you've answered some of it in your presentation. But we kept it in because it is relevant to some of the other questions we'll be asking. So from your data, it looks like the Bracknell sewage treatment works spilled 42 times in 2022, last year, for a total of 463 hours. And from the figures so far in 2023, it looks to be about 39 or 40 spills, just over 500 hours, up until the 4th of December. Obviously, this will be greater after the recent weather. For instance, it was 9 hours yesterday. Just checking if you agree with these figures, or if you have any comments on the size of these figures. Thank you.
And certainly the 2022 figure is absolutely correct from our return to the Environment Agency. The 2023 figure I've got is so far 445 hours and 36 spills. But as you say, it will have gone up in the last couple of days. There was one yesterday. And that, of course, is unverified data, but it's unlikely to change significantly. But it shouldn't be quoted as a sort of firm number, because it's not. It does need verification before it gets sent off.
Okay, thanks.
And that's really why we're planning such a big expansion of Bracknell Sewage Works. And I mean, I can talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing there, if that's of interest.
It is one of our one of the questions further down, but you feel free to talk about it now. That'd be really useful, actually. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on track to complete in 2026. It's going to include an inlet works upgrade. I mentioned those. Additional primary filters, storm tank upgrades, an additional primary settlement tank and secondary tank, and various pipework modifications. And this will provide capacity to treat the population increases associated with Bracknell's published housing supply, as well as significantly reducing the need to discharge untreated sewage in wet weather. So all of that needs to be in place, but it really is a major upgrade, touching every part of the works.
So would we be expecting to see a significant reduction in the spillages
from 2026? Yeah. Yes, but what I would say is that this is a very heavily weather dependent factor. We'll never use weather as an excuse, but this is a phenomenon that's driven by rain. So, if you have a drought year, we'll look like heroes because the number will come right down, hopefully to zero. If we have a really, really wet year, all of a sudden we're villains again. So what the government is saying is average it out over 10 years. We think more realistically, we'll look at a kind of 3-year rolling average. But we've got plans for all of that, and it's not just Bracknell. There's plans for other works as well, but that's the one you asked about. So,
yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll summarize the question of which we have received from Councillor Hayes and my own, which is more focused on the surface waters. I think that's also for you, Richard, and maybe also for you, Dave, because our residents, they focus on what they see, which is the River Blackwater. Which is the cut, and specifically the cut is not in a really good shape. And are you focusing on? I mean, are you taking what you heard so far from you, Richard, where you were looking at sewage works and you increase the capacity, but does it also take the downstream capacity, the downstream quality into account? Is there a focus on, okay, this river looks bad, we improve the sewage works directly linking to that river, or is it just a general upgrade so we comply with a requirement?
Well, the Environment Agency, I'm sure Dave will want to comment on this, but the Environment Agency set the permit standards for the site, and then we have to comply with them. So they will decide if, for instance, the levels of phosphorus need to be reduced or ammonia, and then the works has to comply. But I think there's two things here. It's very easy to get fixated on storm discharges, and of course they're unpleasant, they're horrible, they're very obvious. But we also need to think about the day-to-day discharges in dry weather, because that also contains ammonia and phosphorus and bacteria. And there's a balance between which bits you improve. So one of the things that the Environment Agency look at is what is the dry weather flow going into the river. And if the dry weather flow is going to go up, then probably you've got to reduce the permit standards to allow for less, to keep the polluting load within bounds. So yes, the quality of the receding watercourse and how much it can cope with is part of the Environment Agency's permit setting process that we then have to adhere to. But I must leave that one to Dave because it's more his area than mine.
No, I think that's as far as I understand it. Let's take the river.
I heard we said,
Sure.
young man, Mr. Rayland, I have a chest infection, but in the meantime, I have grave concerns when you said 2026, because that time span I find is very long compared with what we need to be doing now.
Yeah, the problem is this is a really big construction project, and it has to be phased because you cannot shut the sewage treatment works. You have to do little bits at a time. It's like servicing a car with the engine running is the way the operators describe it to me. So there has to be a very complicated hydraulic plan. Every bit that's going in has to be made to work with all the other bits, and all the sensors have to be fitted. It's a very complicated piece of equipment that's required.
Don't underestimate a woman.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, but you understand.
I've been around a long time, and I know the sites around me. Believe me, I am concerned with what you have just said, and I will take it further with the chairman. But in the meantime, I would ask you to look at your timescale. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have looked at all of the timescales for all of these projects to make sure they're achievable, because there's another issue that we're facing, which is the supply chain capacity. In that all the wastewater companies are doing a lot more work. There's a limited number of contractors who can be relied on to do this work, both the design and the build. So we are facing construction delays as well as everything else. So I'm not trying to make excuses here. I'm simply trying to explain that yes, if we could do it tomorrow, we would, but we are moving pretty fast on it.
And also the question I know will come up is planning.
Well, there should all be permitted development because it's within the curtilage of the sewage works, and it's generally only if we have to go outside our boundary that we need planning approval. But I'm sure there are people on the call who are more expert than me on this.
I will go back to the chairman because he is in charge of the timing.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Much appreciated. I have a quick follow-up question on to make sure I understand it on the example of the cut. So the quality of the environment in regarding the cut, this river, is maintained and monitored and set by the Environment Agency, which then fundamentally sets licensing conditions for Thames Water to comply with. Is that roughly correct?
I believe so, but I think I'd like to know what Dave thinks. He might describe it slightly differently, but they set the standards. We have to meet them. Is my understanding of it.
Yeah, so the River Basin Management Plan will set out the current status and the objectives for all of the water bodies. As I mentioned earlier, there are 6 river water bodies that are in the Bracknell Forest area. So if you look at the River Basin Plan, you'll see the monitoring results for those. As I said, none of them are currently meeting good ecological status. So effectively, regarding your comments earlier and the current question, the focus is both on the continual discharges and driving forward improvements on those continuous discharges from sewage treatment works, but also on the intermittent discharges from storm overflows, for instance, but also on other diffuse sources, for instance, potential sources from urbanisation. But in terms of the permitting side, then the focus is very much on driving down the intermittent pollution through the storm overflow plan, but also looking to improve the standards of those discharges for the dry weather flow or the normal flow from those sewage treatment works. And for instance, at the moment, Thames Water have got a scheme in play at East Hampstead sewage treatment works, where they've got works to improve the phosphorus limit at that works. And phosphorus levels are one of the main criteria when you look at it, which is curtailing the environmental standard of rivers in the Bracknell Forest area, as indeed it is in many areas. So many aspects of water quality in Bracknell Forest area are actually good when you look at the results, but phosphate particularly is a particular concern and driver for the water bodies not meeting good ecological status. And of course, that comes both from the normal dry weather discharges from the works, but also from intermittent pollutions from storm overflows. So it has to be an integrated approach to look to improve the overall quality of the rivers going forward.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I see that Madam Mayor has her hand up. Naheed, if you would permit me to have a quick follow-up on what has been said so far, I'll call you next, just 30 seconds, basically. And in the interest of time, I'll move a bit quicker through our question list, and as I said, we can look into that maybe as a follow-up offline. Now, but Richard, that's for you. I mean, you have presented the planned improvements in the local area, which obviously this is great and this is good, and thanks for spending the money. The question is really, I mean, given the news which we have seen, are you certain you have the money to spend? Is that conditional to something that this investments can be made, or is there anything which can derail these plans, either financially or from a permit point of view?
Plans I've talked about so far are all in our current business plan. So it's unlikely that anything will derail those. They could, of course, be delayed, but they will go ahead. Beyond this current business planning period, what we've submitted to our regulators is a draft business plan, and it takes expenditure in the next 5 years to 18.7 billion. As against around about 10 billion in the current 5-year period. So it's a very significant ramp up, which will allow us to do a lot more. But that plan is now, it's a draft. We put it together. It's with our regulators, Ofwat, Environment Agency, Drinking Water Inspectorate, and with the government. And they will respond to that plan. And then we will produce a final plan. And then that final plan will have one final check, and then it'll be signed off. Right. So the funding for the work in the next period will come from the next business plan, which is still in draft.
So that's the period 2025 to 2030. That's
yes,
correct.
But the Bracknell scheme that I talked about is being funded from money in this period. So I don't think there's anything I've talked about tonight that is in any way conditional. But of course, looking forwards, doing the very significant reduction in storm overflows that we want to do, not just in Bracknell Forest, but everywhere else, it's going to require the business plan to go through in something like its current form, or better.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Okay, Madam Mayor,
it's just a quick question. Thank you very much, Christoph. And Mr. Sorry, I can't see the names, all of them in front of me. Is Mr. Raylord.
Yes.
Your presentation raised a question. There is a huge expense involved in tackling the fats going down the drain. have you looked at the ways of maybe working with the refuse collections to provide some system for the collection of domestic oils and fats? Because that is one of the major culprit, and I think it's the households that are mostly polluting and not the businesses. So have you looked at something, maybe providing some education on this issue and also providing equipment for households to dispose of their used cooking oils and stuff so that it doesn't end up in our drainage system?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We have looked at whether collecting domestic oil would be practical or not, and we've looked at it with one or two of the London local authorities, and it was concluded that probably it was more cost effective to put the funding into awareness campaigns in areas where we had a particular problem. We don't have this problem to the same extent everywhere. There are hot spots, and we have maps of where the hot spots are. And actually, it really is the commercial establishments that cause the problems. Clearly, we don't want anybody to put any fat down a drain ever. And there can be a problem at Christmas with turkey fat, particularly, and goose fat from potatoes and things. But in general, it's the fish and chips, it's the kebabs, it's the Indians, it's the Chinese, it's all of the fast food establishments that potentially can put very large amounts of fat down the drain hour after hour. And those are the ones that we're concentrating on because all the evidence shows that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck.
But if people don't have a way of disposing it safely, and I am not aware that there is any education around this, then how are people going to, deal with this issue?
Well,
the
advice we give is that they should simply tip the fat into an old baked bean tin or a soup carton and dispose of it in that way in the rubbish rather than down the drain. And that we do give that advice, and you'll see our Christmas campaign starting up probably in about a week's time, asking people to think really carefully about what they do with turkey fat.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We'll now take the questions from our fellow panelists here in order of raising their hand. Councillor Foster, Mike, you're up.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Brilliant. Richard, I'm the ward member for Sandhurst. So the Sandhurst residents have raised issues around storm overflows to me on the doorstep quite often. And I'm just going to want to play back to you what they say.
Yeah.
We recognise that when there are storms, there are overflows, and we are going to get contamination into the rivers and lakes, which are downstream from that plant. And how do we know when it's safe to go back into the water? So if you take the Blackwater Valley, Horseshoe Lake has an open water swimming club.
Yeah.
And there have been incidents where members of the public and their pets have had adverse reactions to what's gone into the water. So I can see, I've got the digital map in front of me, and I can see the last time that the Sandhurst treatment works had issues and had to discharge. But there's an element of being able to tell the public when it's safe to go back in. Sounds a bit Jaws-esque, but and a member of the public wants to know how to protect their family and their animals when it's the right thing to do. Could you give us a view on how the public can get that information?
I mean, I think the first thing is this is what the map was designed to do, to tell people when there had been a discharge, and they could then look at how far downstream it was that they might want to go in the river. And we would normally say that 48 hours flow after the discharge, things would be back to normal. But the really important thing to recognise is that even when there has been no untreated discharge, there will still be some bacteria in the treated effluent, because the process is not designed to take out bacteria. It does. It takes 99% or thereabouts out, but there's still a significant number getting into the river. But even if you don't have a sewage works discharging anything, rivers are not pristine, sterile environments. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with the Environment Agency looking at the designated bathing water at Wilvercott Mill Stream in Oxford. And what we're finding there is that you've also got E. coli from cattle, horses, other forms of agriculture, E. coli are put in the river by any warm-blooded animal. So, you know, foxes, rats, seagulls are particularly bad because they browse on landfill sites and then come back to the river. Ducks, geese, all of those things are putting contaminants into the water. And there are also things like leptospirosis, which has nothing to do with sewage, which can be spread by rats and other mammals. So what we would say is, really, in terms of safety, yes, we can tell you when there's been a discharge, but really, there's a lot of personal responsibility about really good hygiene, washing hands, not putting your head underwater, because you're not in a swimming pool. And some people think that that's what they ought to be able to do, and I'm afraid it doesn't work like that. So we're not suggesting that sewage discharges don't have an impact. Of course they do, but not the only factor that affects safety from swimming. And I don't know, incidentally, how much water from the Blackwater gets into Horseshoe Lake. I don't know the area that well, but you would also need to look at all of the waterfowl and any mammals that are in the area before you could be completely sure that they weren't bacteria.
It will be the Blackwater. I know the area very well. I walk around it.
And the Blackwater flows into Horseshoe Lake, does it?
Yeah, it just flows by the side, alongside the southern edge of the shore, and when it gets
it overflows.
You get storm. It flows into Horseshoe Lake. So I understand personal responsibility. It's just residents need to know two things. We're trying to restrict the number of times we get an outflow into the Blackwater. That's reasonable, and I'm very heartened to hear that it's going to be investment. I'd be really keen to make sure that happens for obvious reasons. And the second thing is just to be able to ensure that the public know. And while your map is very good, I noticed you mentioned APIs. Are there exemplary ways in which we can really tell our residents when there's an issue? So could you, for instance, point to us and say, there's a really great example in Oxfordshire, which shows how they take the information that we've got and it informs our residents through a particular channel. And that would be able to help them.
I'm afraid there isn't. I mean, we've obviously looked at water companies up and down the country, and we all face the same issue, that if you want to actually analyze the bacteria, it needs to be done in a laboratory. You can't simply sort of dipstick test it. So what some people are experimenting with is looking at an artificial intelligence model, which takes historic records and says, well, the last time we had this much rain, this period of time, and the river was at this level, then the bacteria were at this level, and that's more or less than the safe swimming water level. But Wessex Water are trying that at a place called Whalley Weir, and we're watching it pretty closely with them. And they say themselves they haven't got it right yet. But we're on the case. We understand people's concerns. But we would just stress that there's potentially lots of risks in open water swimming, including standing on broken glass and all sorts of other things. So we just have to be careful with all this.
Last point, just before then I'll stop, is that if you do need an area to trial the Thames Water AI solution, then I'm sure Bracknell Forest area will be the one to do it in.
Thank you very much. Noted. Very helpful.
I think the other relevant factor is the government are promoting that there are more designated bathing waters, freshwater bathing waters designated by DEFRA. And we're seeing an increasing number of designated bathing waters being approved by DEFRA. So where there is a genuine significant bathing area with evidence of significant use, then those are the sorts of candidates which may wish to consider whether they wish to apply for designated bathing water status. And if they become designated, then the Environment Agency is then required to undertake weekly bacterial monitoring of those sites, which give a very good indication of being able to confirm whether the bathing water is safe or unsafe to swim in. So that is another mechanism the government are promoting and wanting more freshwater bathing waters to be designated over time.
Thank you. On this one, do you actually have the data at this moment to train an AI to predict what's, say, Horseshoe Lake, whether Horseshoe Lake is safe to enter?
No, we don't. I mean, we've been taking a lot of samples at Wolvercott Mill Stream with the Environment Agency. We're also working with Thames 21 to do samples. Their volunteers take the samples, and we analyse them in our labs at Wallingford and Henley, which are the two probably next in line for bathing water status. But if Bracknell Forest wanted to apply for bathing water status for one of its areas, we'd happily work with you on getting some samples. But you do, as David said, you do need to get, it needs to be 100 to 150 people a day is the sort of a cut-off point that the government are looking at. So,
okay. No, thanks. So I'm really conscious about time. We'll never get through our whole agenda. But anyway, Councillor Jodie Watts has questions for you. Jodie, you're up.
Hi, Councillor Watts, nice to meet you. And by the way, thank you everyone for the presentations. They were really good. I have some questions for Richard and then some questions for Dave, and I will try and keep them short, but if the answer is longer, then it can always be emailed to us afterwards, because, I mean, as Chair says, we are running a little bit short of time, so apologies. So to Richard, about these parking tanks, I'm guessing there's a reason that you can't increase the number of them so that you can have more of it parked before treatment.
Let me, yes, I mean,
and so one other question, just so I can ask them both at the same time. The other question is, with the other sectors that also contribute to pollution in your charts, how do you collaborate with each other?
Right, okay. So to deal with the second one first, we work with the catchment partnerships. So there are 27 catchment areas designated by the Environment Agency in our area. Each has a catchment host. They receive some funding from the government. They're also currently receiving funding from us to build capacity. And that is the sort of clearinghouse where all the organisations come together. So each of them has a catchment host. It's Thames 21 for the Cut, and it's South East Rivers Trust for the Blackwater. And we are represented on those, but so are all the other organisations. And we'll be very happy to introduce you to your local ones, or talk a bit more offline about that, because it's the way of the future. We've got to work together on this.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So just to widen out your first question a little bit, I think the question was, so what can you do to stop these storm discharges happening? And there's really three things. The first thing is you can deal with it at source and stop the infiltration. So that's absolutely fine if you can find out where it's getting in. And we spend a lot of time working out where it is getting in, and where we find it, we can fix it. But because the sewers are so long, it's not always as easy as it might be to find the infiltration, but that's the ideal way. The second way is you can build a bigger sewage works, and often you have to do that to cope with growth anyway. But because it's a biological process, you can actually have a sewage works that's too big for dry weather, because you can't switch bits on and off in the same way you could switch on a generator or a pump. You can't just add the bugs take time to get hungry and get fed and get built up. So a big sewage works isn't always the answer, but you certainly need to keep ahead of growth. The third thing is you can build bigger storm tanks, and those are great if you're dealing with a big summer thunderstorm or a really wet weekend, because they will hold the flow, then the incoming drops, and you pump them back. What they won't cope with is infiltration. If you've got more flow coming than the works can treat day after day after day, you'll just keep filling storm tanks, because it's easy to fill them, but you can't get them empty. And if you leave stuff in storm tanks for more than a few hours or a day at the most, it starts to go black and stinking, and you get lots of complaints, and it's really very unpleasant. So storm tanks are a fairly short-term solution. So it really, each works, you've got to look at what are those three factors, and what's the best solution for that particular works, bearing in mind what you know about the population, the geology, the growth, and so on.
All right, thank you. And then I had some questions for Dave, and again, if the answer is long, then feel free to email us afterwards. So the plan that gets sent from Thames Valley to Ofwat, who monitors that and makes sure that they adhere to their agenda? The other question is, what qualifies an enforcement from the Environmental Agency? Last question. So if one particular site is offending more than the others, are you allowed to limit the amount that they're licensed to treat in order to help reduce that?
Okay, so I missed the first one. It was, can you just...
The first one is, who monitors the plan from Thames Valley to Ofwat to make sure that they actually adhere to whatever it is they say they set out to plan to do?
Okay, so in terms of their investment plans and their business plans, the primary leader on that process is Ofwat, which is the financial regulator, and we work closely with Ofwat on aspects of it relating to environmental standards.
So if they say we're going to clean River X and then they don't do it, Ofwat will be the first one to say you haven't done this.
Yes, if they don't comply with their business plans, then Ofwat are the primary regulator from the perspective that the companies are required, for instance, to deliver the schemes that they have within their plans.
Okay.
If the companies aren't complying with their environmental permits, then that is our role in terms of assessing compliance and then taking appropriate action. So we are effectively the environmental regulator, and Ofwat's the financial regulator from a wider perspective.
Could you give me an example of what qualifies enforcement?
So our approach to enforcement, when we term enforcement, that could cover a wide variety of sanctions. At one level, that could be a warning letter to a water company, or indeed any body or organisation that holds one of our environmental permits. So we could go from one side through warning letters through up to criminal prosecution. And the assessment of that is based on obviously an evidence basis to our proportionate action. And that's set out within our enforcement and sanctions policy.
Right, but so, what sort of offence would they have to commit to warrant
prosecution?
Enforcement, sorry, yeah.
So in broad terms, it would be something that had serious environmental impacts, and I won't say the water company, and any organisation, if it's a serious environmental impact, and there is no evidence, for instance, if there's evidence of voluntary activity to commit those offences, then that would be ranked higher in terms of culpability. So there's a complete spectrum which is looked at very carefully to make sure that our enforcement is proportionate and fair, together with our legal people. But we would reserve prosecution for the worst offences in terms of environmental impact and the attitude of the offender, for instance.
All right, and my last question was about the are you allowed to change the limit that they're licensed to do if one particular site was offending more than the others, as a for instance?
We can vary environmental permits, but generally speaking, the position, if we're relating to water companies, is that if there is a poor performance at a permitted site, then we would want to see appropriate investment and measures put in place. So the general approach is one of improved investment and performance in site management, as opposed to the requirement for us to modify environmental permits.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for the really interesting, engaging answers so far. We're moving on now to our question list. The next question is again from Councillor Hafferty.
Okay. Just yep. Okay. Right. So this is probably again for Richard. So this is kind of relating to we've noticed the DEFRA storm overflows discharge reduction plan. The latest version being one we saw was September 2023, and in Annex 4 of that, water companies are actually making commitments as to how they're going to reduce discharges, and I see Thames Water has made a 2025 commitment to reduce discharges to an average of 24 per overflow per year. And then also on the same table, it also has a river quality commitment of reducing discharges to an average of 17 per overflow per year. Yeah. I was wondering if you can explain the differences and meanings behind those two commitments and make a comment on them.
Very simple, Adrian. They're both the same thing. 24 spills on average by 2025, 17 spills on average by 2030.
Okay, all right.
So it's a declining, that's our glide path down to get to the government's target of 10, and ultimately, our aim to get to 0.
Okay, that sounds good. I guess one of the issues is obviously the average, we're saying, from the average number of discharges.
Well, that's a problem. If I could just talk a little bit about that. I mean, the government have set, and they want to get to an average of 10. But for us, that's a little bit tricky because, well, it's not tricky, but it means that all overflows are regarded as equal. So something that goes into the tidal River Thames, somewhere down by the Thames barrier, counts the same as something that goes into the cut or a drop stream. So, you know, we aren't able to differentiate between the two. But clearly, in terms of environmental impact and community impact, some are more important than others. So we have to try and work out how we can get to the government's target, but doing it in a way that is appropriate for local people and, frankly, common sense.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we've been told that the cut downstream from the sewage works is one of the most polluted rivers in the Lower Thames region. Are we?
Well, Adrian,
you know,
I defer to Dave on that, but I mean, I've looked at the ecological status, and it's a fail on two particular chemicals. One is PFOS, which is the stain retardant, and then the other one is PDBE, which is a brominated flame retardant. And those are the two which are the chemicals. They're causing a problem, and phosphorus is too high. So one of the things we need to do is strip more phosphorus. But the things that I would be looking at, as I've been a fisherman for 50 years. I would be looking at fish and invertebrates and ammonia and biochemical oxygen demand as the key things, and those are all good. The macrophyte plant life is probably because of the turbidity caused by the phosphorus. That's only moderate, but it's the chemical fail that concerns me. And Dave may know why it fails on those chemicals, and they may or may not be coming through the sewage works. But in terms, I wouldn't personally put it as one of the worst polluted rivers in the catchment, but it's not good, and we can make it better.
Okay, I'll just, before Dave cuts in there, I'll just say that Thames 21 seemed to imply that they believe this was due to the coming from the sewage works rather than outflows or anything like that. But I'll let Dave.
Thames 21s tend to say that, but we do work with them, and there is a whole range of potential factors, and we need to get more evidence. I mean, there is a dearth at the moment of really good water sampling evidence. So the water companies are trying to encourage citizen science so that we do get more live information.
We'd like to encourage that as well. So yeah.
I haven't looked at in detail at the evidence, but I guess my initial view would be that when I looked across the information again in the River Basin Plan about the current status of the water bodies, it didn't appear to me to be an outlier in terms of one of the worst. But as the way we assess our waters and the way we classify them is quite complex. So I think it would probably be a question for, you know, if people are believing that's an evidence-based approach, then what elements of evidence are they using? It may be that it's particularly bad on one particular criteria, for instance, phosphate levels. So it is a complex picture, and I don't immediately recognise that, but it would be around clarifying the nature of the claim.
Okay, right, thank you.
Okay, I noticed that we are just 5 minutes out from the targeted end time. I want to move on to the stakeholder interaction question list, which we have prepared. Very likely we will not be able to discuss them all. I just want to read out a couple of them because one is redundant, I think. And I would invite Nikki, Richard, and Dave to pick up what they can answer in the remaining time and hope for a written response as indicated. So we have one question, which is it appears that Oxfordshire has agreed with Thames Water that developments of 12 houses or more would have to be agreed from Thames Water regarding sewage capacity in any upgrade before the planning application is registered. And can Thames Water provide context to this agreement?
Yeah.
That's question one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just read them.
Yeah.
Cool. Then number two is, are there in Thames Water's opinion opportunities for local building control to ensure stormwater drains do not go into main sewers? Question three, routes to stakeholder engagement. I think you already answered that, Richard. Thank you very much. Number four, does Thames Water offer support to correlate new developments with effects on discharge frequency? And number five, does Thames Water assist communities with best practice for planning, reducing the system load? For example, CERTs. Okay.
Okay, right. Quick answers then, yeah. West Oxfordshire and the Cotswolds have a particular problem with infiltration and very high groundwater levels. And we've therefore pioneered a new approach, which has taken a lot of work between our developer services team and West Oxfordshire's planning team. And what we've come up with there is that we've amended West Oxfordshire's validation checklist. So any major planning applications, which means 10 dwellings or more, have to engage with Thames Water pre-planning and provide confirmation that capacity exists both in the network and the sewage works before an application will be validated. So this is more work for West Oxfordshire, it's more work for us, but we think it's the right thing to do. So West Oxfordshire and Cotswolds have done this. No other local authority has. We'd be happy to talk to your planners. We can put them in touch with West Oxfordshire. We can share the draft agreements. It was done as a trial. If people want to learn from it and maybe do it differently, we're very, very happy with that. We do worry about developers and their connections. The first thing is they still have an automatic right to connect their surface water to our foul sewer if they want to. We will try and dissuade them. Planning officers will try and dissuade them, but the law says ultimately they've got a legal right. And this is all to do with something called Schedule 3 of the Floods and Water Management Act, which outlawed this in 2010. But the government in England have never enacted that schedule to remove the developer's right. They have in Wales, and surprise, surprise, the roof hasn't fallen in, things work quite well. So we've been on at the government, but they are, of course, under pressure from house builders. And there is a consultation promised yet again for this autumn. Well, we'll see how it goes, but that's really important. The other thing is developers put in lovely plans which show surface water going off in one direction, foul water going off in another. And that all gets signed off. The problem is they then subcontract the drainage work, and sometimes it gets subcontracted. And then the person who turns up to do the work digs a hole, finds a pipe, connects it up, fills it all in and walks away. And we don't know anything's wrong until the next wet winter when our pumping station teams say, it never used to be overloaded like this. And then we have to go back and dig a hole and find out what's going on. So we just ask building control to be really mindful of the importance of, in some areas, we do now actually send our own people around to inspect before the hole gets filled in, but it's quite complicated. But it does need to be done. And then I think in terms of sort of correlating what's going on in the river with what's going on with development, what we do there is we keep in touch with councils to make sure we know what development is coming. We're consultees on local plans, although we aren't on individual applications. We rely on talking to planning officers and making sure that we have time to increase the size of the sewage works before big new developments are built. So that, and on the stakeholder engagement side, Nikki is your sort of one all-purpose route into Thames Water. She will find somebody, me or someone, to answer whatever questions you've got.
Awesome.
Sorry, that was a bit quick, but
well, no, thank you. Thanks a lot for giving that intel in that short time scale. I think we missed the last one, but it's already 8 o'clock. And we asked the question, so at some point, I'm quite sure Nick will find an answer for us. That's all right. At this point, conscious about time, I would like to close this meeting. And first of all, thank you, all of you, for attending and for this really, really interesting contributions. I think this is good stuff. It will help us a lot in our work, and will all find its way, one way or another, into our final recommendations to our council. And in particular, thanks for finding the time that in this busy period in the ramp up to Christmas. I know everybody's supposed to be somewhere and be Father Christmas or Mother Christmas somewhere or on a Christmas party here or there. I'm missing my own business as one, but well, there are things which are more important in life, which is talking to you guys. And with that, I would like to close the meeting. Say again, thank you very much. We will now stop the recording. And I wish you all really a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope to be in touch with you in the future on behalf of Brecon Forest